Welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. We believe life is about how we react. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast. This is Kyle. Anyone who has listened to our show before knows that Sean always thinks he's right. So I reached out to somebody I met recently. His name is Dr. Freedman. He's a practicing psychologist. And I reached out to him because I wanted to prove Sean wrong. So enjoy our interview with Dr. Al. Dr. Al Freedman, welcome to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to be here, Sean and Kyle.
I'm honored and excited that you agreed to come online so you can set Kyle straight. We've got some issues to work through.
I'll do my very best, Sean.
No, it's going to take a lot more than that.
So speaking of that, the thing that sort of spurred us to reach out to Dr. Al was episode 123. Some of our listeners might recall that we talked about this concept of the fact that we all know it's valuable to have people around us and numbers in our life to support us. But then when things get hard, we tend to pull back. And I don't know if it's because of pride or fear of failure or what other people are going to think. But, we kind of wanted to talk through that a little bit. So, Dr. Al, what makes you qualified to have this conversation? Just for our listeners, I want everyone to get a perspective for who you are.
Oh, thanks, Cal. I believe what qualifies me to have this conversation is that I'm a human being who's lived in this world, as you guys have, and as we all have. And I happen to be a practicing psychologist, and I work with many individuals, children, adolescents, and families, and help people through difficult periods in their lives as well.
One of the reasons that we got connected was our connection to the rare disease community. And so can you tell us a little about your son, Jack?
Yes. I'm so blessed to be Jack's dad. My son, Jack, was born in April of 1995, and he was healthy at birth. And 6 months later, the doctor noticed that Jack wasn't sitting up and wasn't rolling over as a normal 6-month-old does. And mom and dad didn't know there was anything unusual about Jack. But at that 6-month appointment, we were alerted that there was. And just a few days later, in a hospital with a pediatric neurologist, we were told that Jack was affected by a neuromuscular disease called Spinal Muscular Atrophy, or SMA, which at the time had no treatments and no cure. No cure still, but we have treatments now. But at the time, there wasn't much hope for baby Jack, and we were told to expect to have him for 1 year from that time. That was election day, 1995, 25 years since we sat in that room and we were told our baby wouldn't live very long. Thankfully, Jack is very much alive. He's taking a nap in the other room right now, but he's very much alive. He's 25 and a half years old, and he is affected by SMA. And he uses a wheelchair and has a ventilator and a tracheotomy and a feeding tube, and the nurse is with him 24/7. We've had 250 or 300 nights in the intensive care unit over these years and a couple of surgeries, many challenges and obstacles to overcome. But my son has taught me a great deal in these 25 years, and I feel very grateful to be his dad. It was very, very hard 25 years ago to receive that news, but these years later, I'm reflecting back and just so I'm proud of my son for his determination and for all the things that he's taught me and taught so many other people.
Beautiful. our episode 123, the subject that we're sort of referencing today, it actually sort of started with a conversation about diagnosis. And that was one of the hardest things for me, I know, and all three of us. And so one of the things we talked about was, why do we have this tendency to pull back and not share that really tough thing when it happens?
Well, the way that I experienced my son's diagnosis and the way that I see other families that I work with experience a diagnosis is what we call in psychology a trauma. It's a psychological trauma. And what happens when a person experiences trauma is that we become disoriented, that our whole sense of who we are and how we fit into this world gets completely flipped upside down. And it's shocking and it's um, paralyzing emotionally, and it's very, very disorienting. So, when any person faces something that's life changing, that disrupts their sense of who they are and how they are in the world, it causes us to be traumatized and disoriented. And it takes us time to regain our sense of orientation and time and place and to redefine who we are. And that doesn't happen immediately. It happens over a period of time, and for some of us, a long period of time. It's
Right.
easier for me 25 years later to talk about my son and to be his dad. But when that diagnosis happened, I was scared and I felt isolated and I felt completely emotionally overwhelmed and I felt disoriented. And it took a good few weeks, if not months, if not years, to really reorient to this new world that we found ourselves in. I think our situation as people affected and families affected by disability is one example of why people pull back when things are difficult. This is our version of difficult. And there are other versions of difficult that people
Right.
face every day that also cause them a version of trauma or disorientation that causes people to pull back because they don't know they don't know what to do in this new feeling state, and we all
Yeah.
need to reorient before we can move forward.
One thing I'm wondering about, obviously, I get the word trauma, right? Something goes wrong, and that's disorienting. If I were to win the lottery, right? $5,000 a day for the rest of my life, or some huge jackpot. That wouldn't be traumatic, I guess. It's not a bad thing, but it would be a game changer, right? So I would think that alone could be disorienting if we use that word. Like, okay, that's everything in life changes. I imagine if I won, I would start telling people, right? Maybe not the whole world because I don't want to be a target, but I would probably text a few close friends, call some family, and be like, "Oh my gosh, hey guys!" So, in the terms of the different types of disorientation, why do we as humans tend to clam up when it's bad and go crazy when it's good? And when I say crazy, I mean, talk openly about it.
Sure. Oh, what we're talking about here in plain English is good news and bad news.
Yeah.
Um, Now, just let's put aside all the studies that show that people who win the lottery end up having a lot of problems
Sure.
because it's such a disorienting experience, and people again don't quite know how to adjust to that drastic change. Some have very great difficulty because of that. Good news, but it's a drastic change. I think that we're faced with bad news. We don't know how to talk about it sometimes because some people feel embarrassment and shame um, when something bad happens. We feel sad and don't feel that broadcasting bad news feels good to us. So people will tend to keep it to themselves. And another thing that I have experienced in my life and when Jack was diagnosed is that if we share bad news, we can risk traumatizing the people we share it with.
Mm.
And so, in the case of a diagnosis, I remember a social worker at the hospital telling me that people won't know what to do when they hear this news,
Mm.
and that we need to tell people, tell our friends and family about Jack's diagnosis and give them directions about what to do. Otherwise, they won't know what to do. And I remember thinking, oh, great, something more I have to deal with right now, like
Mhm.
everybody else's reactions to this, much less my own. But that gave me a little window into this question as well, because we we did need to have our friends and family know what was happening, but we didn't quite know how to go about doing that. And back in 1995, when the internet was so new and email was used, but not that much, I remember writing letters at the recommendation of that social worker to all our friends and family and put a letter in the mail to friends and family saying, here's what's happened. And we want to share this news with you. And it's not good news, but we need your help and want your help. And here's how you can help us. So we gave our family and friends direction about how to receive the news and that we wanted to be treated just the same way we were before and hope that they would stay in our lives and get to know Jack, regardless of how long he lived. So I think that's another dimension of of the issue of bad news is not only being reluctant to talk about it ourselves because of it being bad news and maybe feeling shame or embarrassment or not knowing how, but also what will other people think of that news and how will they react? And might we bring on a greater burden to ourselves by sharing it? So we tend to go slowly and share only with people we trust the most. And and then as we receive support from our close family and friends, we then gain strength and courage to share the news with others a little at a time and a little at a time. That's how most people react to this kind of situation. Because I'm a psychologist, a therapist in practice, and because my work is confidential and my clients know that, I often meet a new client right in the middle of a trauma for that client. People don't call me when something good is happening. People only call me when
Mm.
there's something difficult happening, when something has gone terribly wrong or something has um, emerged after a number of years of leading to something that's gone in a difficult direction. So that first contact I have with my clients professionally is often when they're at their lowest point. And because the work I do is confidential, people feel safe opening up and explaining what's happening as a way to test it out. Some folks are testing out how this sounds to them and how somebody they don't know responds to their bad news before they talk to people they do know. And
Right.
some of the clients will ask me for guidance during that difficult initial moment of how to talk about this difficult situation with a friend, with family, with a spouse, with their mother.
Yeah.
People need help with that. It's not easy to figure out all by yourself when it's an unfamiliar situation. That's again back to that word of trauma and the word of disorientation. It's these things aren't what we are used to every day. So when something
Right.
strikes suddenly, whether it's a diagnosis or it's a divorce or it's a serious illness or a death in the family or some other significant life changing challenge, people don't know what to do because they haven't had that happen before.
Sure. Were you practicing psychology 25 years ago? Or was that something after the birth of your son?
I was I was finishing my doctorate in
Mm.
psychology, Sean. I had been a classroom teacher in my 20s and uh, taught school for 8 years,
Mm.
second and third grade. Went back to graduate school. Jack was born the very tail end of my doctoral program at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And I was in my doctoral internship, psychologist practice under supervision for 1 year after receiving a doctorate. And we were in a small town about 100 miles north of New York City. And I was a psychology intern when Jack was diagnosed election day 25 years ago. So I was just I'm at the very, very last piece of my training, and I I was about to become a psychologist, and I needed one really fast when this happened.
So you talk about telling friends and family about the diagnosis, and did some of those friends, maybe that were a little more on the periphery, did some of them just not stick around anymore? Is that something that happened to you?
I don't recall anybody not sticking around. I recall a range of responses, and it's so many years ago that I have to think about that and
Yeah.
who our friends were back then. And no, I don't think anyone disappeared. What I do recall was that it was harder news for friends who were also having babies at the time. I almost felt guilty when I
Mm.
would pass by a woman who was pregnant and they saw Jack in his little wheelchair because I could see they were scared. So I needed to be sensitive to friends and family who were young families and having babies themselves at the time. Um, and our parents were devastated by this in our close family, but um, nobody bailed on us. Actually, they most did the opposite, and I think part of the reason was because we were clear about what we needed and gave them directions about how to help us. And also, Jack himself, he still is, and he was as a baby, smiling, happy, not a worry in the world, never complained. And so, if you got close to Jack, you wanted to stick with Jack, and that's still the case 25 years later.
Is Jack your only child?
No, we adopted a second child named Kara when Jack was 5, and my daughter is now 20 years old, was adopted as a 4-month-old infant and arrived here from Korea in the year 2000 when Jack was 5 years old. So I have a 25-year-old son and a 20-year-old daughter. Very lucky to have both of my children.
You said something earlier that I want to dig into a little bit. You talked about how in your profession, people only call you when things are going bad or wrong. I'm curious if all you're hearing all the time is everybody else's hardships, how do you stay mentally and emotionally healthy yourself? Like, I imagine that's gotta weigh on you.
Well, thanks. I appreciate the question, Sean. And I can only speak for myself,
Mm.
but you, first, I don't only hear bad news 100% of the time. My point was more that the initial contact from someone usually comes when things aren't going well,
Sure.
and and that hopefully and usually is the lower or lowest point. So my satisfaction in my work is supporting someone and helping them reorient to something that's difficult that's happening, or reframe something that's difficult that they need help with understanding, or providing guidance when they're in a complicated situation so they can find their way out of it in a healthy and constructive way. So I have the privilege of being part of an experience that trends upward from that low point.
Sure.
And I always enjoy saying to my clients, I like to joke with, especially adolescent boys, like, you're moving into my success story category here. You know, I like to see the progress and encourage that progress. So it's a you get to see good news emerge, and it's all relative from that lowest point. To answer your question about how I take care of myself, I've been pretty committed to exercise, and exercise has been a really good way for me to stay healthy. And as I tell all of my clients, most issues can be helped by getting a good night's sleep and eating well. And then you add exercise on top of eating and sleeping, and you've got a trifecta that usually helps people to be their best. We all learn in mental health profession to do our best to compartmentalize so that when we're on duty, we're on duty, and when we're not, we're enjoying other things so that we have a range of experiences. And one last thing I should add is that Jack himself has been a great help in that um, when you are told your 6-month-old baby isn't going to live very long, you quickly learn what's a big deal and what's not such a big deal. So Jack's always sort of on my shoulder, not literally. He can't sit up, but but he's always with me in terms of perspective, offering me perspective,
Mm.
and through him, I'm able to offer perspective uh, to others. He's really taught me a lot about what's a big deal and what's not a big deal, and he's also taught me about humility and empathy. When other people feel pain, I think I'm better at my job at relating to people and their complicated challenges and their pain, and I believe I have more empathy for each and every client because of the empathy that was given to me, the kindness and compassion that was offered to me by so many people along the way when I was in pain about Jack's diagnosis. So I think I have Jack's sort of my secret agent that's always with me.
Al, I wanna back up a little bit. You talk about your son, and initially he was 6 months old. Doctors gave you a year at best, and now 25 and a half years later, you still get to hold your son and talk to him every day. What are some things maybe that you have learned over the years? Or if you could go back 25 years, what would you tell yourself back then?
Thank you, Sean. I appreciate the question. 25 years ago, when we sat in that room at the Children's Hospital, the doctors um, really didn't give us much hope. And they talked a lot about things that Jack would never be able to do, that he would never walk, that he wouldn't be able to swallow food, that he wouldn't be able to breathe when he got a cold, um, and he'd need a wheelchair. They talked about CPR and infant CPR and do not resuscitate orders. It was a whole lot of stuff that no parent should ever have to hear. But
Mm.
reflecting on that, I know the doctors, and they were very kind. They were doing their job. They were preparing us for what was to come. And almost everything they told us has proven correct, with the exception of the prognosis. Jack is still here 25 years later. They told us he'd only live for 1 year. What the doctors didn't tell us was that we'd have good days. And what I didn't know then, that I know now, is that Jack and our kids who have special needs also, along with the rare disease, um, come some very rare gifts, some unusual, unique, rare gifts that my son has given the world and continues to, that I would never have thought of. And it's taken me a long time to see the positive, unanticipated consequences of such a difficult situation. My son, when he drives his wheelchair into a room, he gives the gift of perspective. Without saying a word, everybody's big problems get smaller really quickly, just
Mm.
in his presence. That gift of perspective is unusually powerful without opening his mouth and without saying a word. A second unanticipated gift is that, as difficult as his medical condition has been and as limited as he is physically, Jack brings out the best in everybody whose path he crosses. He's amazing at bringing out the best in people. And for years, I worked in a school, a boarding school, where there were adolescents who got in trouble from time to time. I was a psychologist on that boarding school campus. And when it snowed and we needed some help, the first kids to show up to shovel the walk at 7 o'clock in the morning were those same kids who the disciplinarian at the school was always wrangling with and was always asking my advice about. They were the first ones out the door at 7 in the morning to make sure Jack could get his wheelchair out the door in the snow. No matter who he's come to know, my son has brought out the best in everybody. And a third gift, just to mention, that feels very important is that our kids with special needs, and my son is a magnet for open-hearted people. I've met so many extraordinary, compassionate, open-hearted people who choose to get involved in Jack's life. He's a magnet for these people, and That's a special gift as well. You know, guys, I became a father. I chose to become a dad. I made that choice, but I didn't make the choice to become the dad of a physically handicapped, ventilator dependent son. I chose to become a dad. But all these other people we've met, doctors and researchers and nurses and wheelchair repair people, and I could go on and on and on. They made the choice to help us. And they made a choice to get involved in this very unusual twilight zone that I was launched into against. I didn't choose it. I would never have chosen this life for my son or myself. But my son has a gift of drawing compassionate, open hearted people to him. And I feel so blessed for the relationships with so many extraordinary people who I've come to know because of my son. So I, I, I these are things I didn't know 25 years ago. And I think it's important to pass them on for families who may be new at being a parent of a child with special needs, because there are some positive consequences that come along with all the burdens. And I feel very grateful 25 years later that my son's here with me and that I am able to see those gifts at this point in a way that I couldn't before.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this, brings up the tagline of this podcast, living beyond circumstances, and realizing that disability does not mean bad. It is definitely a whole lot different than what you thought it was going to be, life, but it's not bad at all. And that's what I hear you saying. I love it.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that with us, because for me, it's an exercise in looking at the entire picture of life and identifying the good. So to me, it reminds me that I've got to actively and intentionally identify what I'm learning and evaluate the experiences I'm having in life so that I can pull out the good things and recognize how it's helping me be a better person, a better dad, maybe a better husband, a better counselor, a better whatever. So I really appreciate you taking us down that route for a
Yeah.
moment.
Sean, I think that's a good reminder. Like, to me, I'm thinking, you know what? The bad stuff's there. It's just a matter of what you choose to find. Like, if you're always looking for the good, yeah, sure, the bad stuff's there, but let's pass that up and find the good stuff to emphasize. Yeah. Dr. L, we have something that we have talked about in a few episodes lately, and it's this issue of how we define authenticity. And does that mean sharing all the deep, dark secrets? Are we covering things up when we only share the good stuff? And if there was a second part to that question, like, what is an effective way to share the dark stuff so that we can get it out there?
I love this question. Kyle, thank you. The word I associate most closely with authenticity in the context you're asking this question is the word integrity. And I see integrity as so important for each of us to be true to who we are, that the the way that we behave and the way that we interact with others is true to who we are. So I start with that. And if I feel that in the work I do and in my personal life that I'm being honest with others, true to myself, then I feel good about those interactions. And if I veer off from that, if I sense that the way that I'm behaving or the way that I'm speaking isn't true to who I am, something internally tells me that and steers me back to that track. The the question that you're asking about how much we share with others is related to integrity and authenticity, but it's not necessarily the same thing. In that, as you said, who we share what with and how we share it are both pretty important variables in the mix. We we don't want to share everything with everybody all the time. That's too much. We share what we feel comfortable sharing with others. We share more with people who we're closer to and who we trust the most. And the closer we get to somebody and the more we trust them, the more that we will share in general, and the more that what you call dark, people who know us well are going to figure out all sides of us. The closer you get to somebody, the more you experience all the dimensions of that person. And the closer you are to that person, the more likely they are to share more of their history and more of themselves. I think some of the work I do when situations are complicated, sometimes people have an instinct to broadcast um, personal information to everybody. But once you do that, you can't pull it back.
Right.
Once it's out, it just goes further out to more people. And if people are in emotional distress or they're having some kind of cathartic experience, they sometimes have this instinct of wanting to tell the whole world, but it's sometimes not in a person's best interest to tell the whole world. So I tend to encourage people to say less first and test it out, because you can always add people and
Mm-hmm.
add information, but you can never take back something that you said.
A question for you on a personal note. What pushed you into psychology?
Well, I was, as I said, a classroom teacher, and what pushed me into psychology was that I really loved the children. I loved the experience of being in a classroom with kids, and I did that for a number of years. Um, but after a few years, when you teach third grade, 4 times 8 is always 32, no matter what game you make up. You know, so I kind of had learned how to do that job, and I was ready for something new. And over the years, I started feeling, as I got good at that job, okay, I'm good with kids, and I'm good at this. And while I was a teacher, some unfortunate things happened with children who were students of mine. And most specifically, I had, I believe, 3 children in 8 years who lost their parents, a couple suddenly to heart attacks and one to cancer. And I watched as these children and their families adjusted to such difficult and stressful loss, and was part of those kids' lives when I was very young and they were too. And that drew me into school to become a helping professional, because I felt a lot of energy about helping kids who were facing really difficult circumstances. And those were 3 examples. There were others, they were the most acute examples. But energized me in a different way than making up games for multiplication tables. And I'm glad I went back to school, because it provided me an opportunity to help in a different way. And I now also often consult with people in schools and with teachers and principals and heads of schools and superintendents. So I still feel connected to that world in my work.
Dr. Al, this doesn't necessarily relate to our conversation, but I wanted to ask one thing that I've never really I've read a few articles online, and I think this is a really important thing. Like, if people are thinking to themselves, especially right now, if people are thinking to themselves, maybe I need some professional help because there's some stuff that's going on in my head that I just want to get a handle on. How would you recommend that somebody goes about finding the right therapist to help them out?
It's a great question. I don't just use the old version of the yellow pages. That's the don't,
Right.
right? You don't do it randomly. Um, People find me through word of mouth. And so I would encourage anybody who's interested in finding help to if you can ask anybody you know and trust, if you know somebody who does this kind of work, you ask your physician, your primary care physician, or if you're a parent with a kid, ask a school counselor, somebody in the schools, or your pediatrician for your child. Anybody in your community who you trust, who would know who the trusted professionals are. The word of mouth would be your best bet. I'll add to that, Kyle, that because there's a pandemic now, people in my work, as many, are working online and not in person, which has actually made it easier for many people, and especially people with disabilities who interact with me in my practice. It's a lot easier not to have to transport yourself, whether you have a disability or not, to my office. So it's all online right now. So there's a broader range of people available. People who are helping professionals, as I am, who have a license, need to practice within their state lines, but there have been exceptions made in those laws right now because of the pandemic. So there's some flexibility, and telehealth is a really effective, much more effective than I would have expected way to have the help. So there are even better opportunities than there were before.
Wonderful. I think the bottom line is that if somebody is in that position where they're like, I think I need some help, to look for it, to take action and ask around and get started on that journey.
It's absolutely correct, and that is especially true right now in this era of COVID, where and winter's coming, and in cold weather parts of the world and our country, people are more isolated. People are stressed. There's a lot of uncertainty right now, and it's been a very busy time for people like me. And I think it's very important for everybody to feel connected and feel supported, however they can, whether it's with
Right.
family or friends supporting you, or a professional. If you need support, I encourage people to seek it, to stay connected. The word here is connection. This isn't, I mean, this isn't Dr. Al, the psychologist, talking. This is Al, the human being, talking. We all need to be connected.
So if people want to get connected to you and reach out, how should they do so?
Oh, probably the best way to track me down would be on email or through my website, which is freedmancounseling.com, FREEDMAN counseling.com, or al at freedmancounseling.com. And I'd be more than happy to support the needs of anybody in the disability community. I'm actually focusing my work more and more on people who face challenges like my son, and the entire community of people who face unusual challenges. It's what I do. And I feel blessed to be able to help.
I love that. And we feel blessed that you are lending that help and you came on today and share with us and our listeners about your journey. So thank you very much for chatting with Kyle and I and working through navigating these issues that tend to come up quite a bit between us. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the honor of joining you in your work. I appreciate the opportunity to know you guys. Thank you.
So freedmancounseling.com. Be sure to check it out. We'll link it in our show notes.
Dr. Al, thanks so much. We'll talk to you soon. I enjoy how patient he is. He sounds and even seems like an incredibly patient man, which is obviously important when dealing with the likes of you, Kyle. And for the record, I think I'm more aligned with that professional train of thought than you were. So I'm glad that he was able to come on and set you straight. Yeah. You go ahead and keep thinking that. And I think everyone knows. Well, Dr. Al, thank you for joining us. Kyle, we need to wrap up here with some one things this week. One thing I'm going to work on or handle is the maintenance notification that keeps popping up on my car. I keep ignoring it because I know it's fairly routine, right? It's just an 18,000 mile checkup, oil change, or whatever. Not that big of a deal. But I've been ignoring it for several weeks now. So I'm going to take it in and get it serviced. What are you going to do this week? You got to do. Hey, so is there a light on your dashboard? Well, it pops up on the radio display, so you can hit OK. Yeah, I get it. Every time I turn my car on, it gives me that notice, and I just say OK. Okay, so it's not like your engine light is on. No. Okay, got it.
I'm not
All
that
right.
daring.
So I am going on a trip to see my family. I haven't seen them all year like many other people because my family lives all the way across the U.S. I am going to see them for 6 weeks. I hope we'll be able to stand each other for that long. But this week I am going to pack for that trip. And so I haven't traveled in a long time, obviously, so I'm sort of out of practice of packing up. So I just got to think of everything that I'm going to need. But also, I think I'll just buy stuff when I get there, too. Oh, I forgot this. I'll just, yeah.
Well, that'll be a fun trip. Looking forward to having you on the West Coast for a little while. So with that, we'll close it out with some thank you notes. I'm going to say thank you to whoever produces Tide. I don't know if that's like a Procter & Gamble type brand or a Johnson. Like, I don't know. Is Tide its own brand? Whatever.
I don't know.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
I'm thankful that they have Tide Pods. I've recently given them a try, and I love them. It is so much easier than pouring liquid soap or, and surprisingly, there's plenty in there. I've always thought they're kind of pricey for just a little bit, but no, it's like a normal load count, and I have found them to be much, much easier. So
I gotta try that. I like it.
Tide.
My thank you goes out to our friend Paul, and I've probably thanked him before on the show because he's just super awesome. But last week he came and installed my Nest thermostat. So all I have to do is tell Alexa to turn out the heat or turn down the heat, and I can also obviously monitor it from outside of my house. So thank you to Paul. My hands don't work as well because of FA to operate like a screwdriver and everything that's needed to install a thermostat. So Paul came over, did it for me, and I really appreciate it.
Nice. Speaking of Paul, he celebrated a birthday a couple weeks ago. So for whatever it's worth, happy belated birthday, Paul. Thank you as always for tuning in today. We hope you enjoyed the episode and the conversation with Dr. Al. So I've got a feeling we're going to need his expertise to keep Kyle in line in the future. So we look forward to chatting with you or at you next week. Until then,
keep living with urgency. Thank you for listening to the Two Disabled Dudes podcast.
Find us online at twodisableddudes.com and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Special thanks to our friend and audio producer, Jake Tompkins.